Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So this video is going to show you all the sewing part on how I made this pretty corset dress. So let's get right to it. So here I've cut out the fabrics. These are the fabrics for the front pattern and these are also the fabrics for the back pattern. As you all can see, I also went ahead to cut out fabrics for lining. I'm using a doll face material for the lining. So these are the cutout patterns for the skirt. And as you all can see, the lining for the skirt is 2 inches shorter because we're going to fold the skirt inside. We do not want the lining to be coming out from the down of the skirt. So these are the fabrics for the yoke, the back yoke, and this here is the fabric for the front yoke. Here I also cut out the sleeve with the same material for the yoke, and this here is the inner corset. As you all can see, I've already turned it all over. So how did I turn this inner corset over? I went ahead to join my two back patterns together with a sellotape and then I traced it out on a fabric. So it is advisable to use a thick fabric for an inner corset. My main fabric is stretchy, so I'm using the doll face for the inner corset. So I traced out the joined back patterns together and then I extended the line to my hip points. After extending it, I went ahead to measure out the hip measurements and then I connected it to the traced pattern. So after connecting it, I decided to reduce the inner corset by half of an inch because this our fabric that we use for tracing has a zip allowance and the inner corset doesn't need a zip allowance, but we need extra half inch for turning allowance. So I just reduced half of an inch from the 1 inch zip allowance. So here I went ahead to reduce the length as well by 1 inch because we do not want the inner corset to start at the same point as the chest line of the dress. We do not want it to be showing in the yoke. I hope you understand. So this is me cutting out the second, another pattern for the inner corset because we would use this same material for turning it all over. So another thing I used for the inner corset is a paper stain. So this paper stay is necessary to give it that thick stability, to give it that thick hold, to make it more strong. So after cutting it all over, I just went ahead to sew it up and turn it. So now back to our pattern. First, for sewing, we'll go ahead and sew the two front pieces together and we'll also do the same thing for the lining. So we've sewed it up together and as you all can see, I also went ahead to iron a hairstay on the fabric because the fabric is stretchy. So I ironed it on all the fabric. I also went ahead to cut padding for the breast parts to serve as cups. So next we're going to do is, after locating which part of the bra cup is the right and which part is the left, we would go ahead and sew it up together. So it is actually necessary to label your cups while cutting. So now let's go ahead and sew it up. So now I've sewn the cup up and next thing I'm going to do is to attach it to the front piece. So attach it by placing the midpoint of the cup to the midpoint of the front piece. That is the joint point in the cup to the joint point in the front piece, if you understand. So we'll join it up, pin it up with a pin or just notch it up, whichever one is better for you, and then we'll go ahead and sew it up. So now we've sewn it up. So you can see our corset is already coming out nicely. So we'll just keep this up aside and then we'll go over to the back pattern. So for the back, we'll just sew it up together And as you all can see, I've sewed it up. I also went ahead to sew the back, the lining together. Next is time for us to attach our yoke. So if you all can recall, while sewing, while drafting our pattern, I told, I said it is advisable to mark the points where your yoke stops or where your yoke ends. So from that point, while cutting, I also notched the region where my yoke rested. So from that point, I went in by 1 inch joining allowance for the darts. And I also went ahead to increase this dart by extra 1 inch, which is why I added extra 1 inch. So anything that you used in your dart, you will add it from the notch that you notched, from the point that you notched in the initial pattern drafting. So maybe if your dart was 1 inch, you would come out from the notch by 1 inch plus your 1 inch join allowance, and that is where your yoke would rest. So I hope you guys understand. And now after marking out where the yoke rested, you will just like pin up your yoke, pin your lining as well, and go ahead to sew it down. So I've joined the both pieces together, and this is what we have. I also went ahead to sew on the lining just to keep the fabric in place. Now the next thing we're going to do is we would fold our fabric into two, both the lining and the actual fabric separately, and then we will notch the midpoints. This is to help us to be able to attach it properly to the down part of the dress. So I went ahead to also notch the skirt part, that's the down part of the dress. I did the same thing by folding it into two, getting the midpoint and notching it. So now the next thing we are going to do is we'll place both notched parts together, join it up and just sew it up together. We would also do the same thing for the lining. So now we've joined the pieces together, both the up and down piece together. So the next thing we're going to do now is to turn our skirt, our dress over. So we'll start by sewing the down parts, by sewing on the down parts, and after sewing, we'll raise it up and sew on both sides of the dress. So we sew the down parts first because we want the dress to turn over properly because our lining is shorter than the actual length of the dress. So as you all can see, I'm done sewing, and while sewing I left a little bit of space just to turn it all over. So now this is me turning the dress to the right side. So we're done turning, and this is the look, and you can see how the back is as well. So now I'm back to the front. If you all can notice from the picture on the thumbnail, this is the design of the dress. So how did I make this design? I used chiffon material. I went ahead to cut long strips of chiffon material, 3 inches wide and any length long. So I gathered those materials and then I just like tacked it up on the breast region, on the cup part with needle and thread. So from the notch parts that we did for placing of the yoke, from that our notch region, I went in again by my dart inches that I took plus my sewing allowance inches I took. My sewing allowance is 1 inch plus my darts which I took was 2 inches. So from the notch I came inside by 3 inches more. Yeah, 3 inches more. And then I'm going to place my yoke on that point. So here I just recall that I went ahead to tighten the upper part of the bra cup a little bit more by half inch, which turns out to be 1 inch because folding it in by 1 inch on both sides is half inch on both sides is 1 inch. So I went ahead to add that extra 1 inch, which is making it 4 inch from the point of the notch. So the next thing I'm going to do is to pin the yoke to my fabric and pin my lining as well, and then sew it up together with half an inch allowance. So I've sewed it up and this is the look. As usual, I went ahead to sew my sewing allowance down by pushing it to the lining part and then sewing on the lining. So this is, we're done with the up part. So next thing we're going to do now is to attach it to the down part of the dress. So we're going to fold both the up and the down into two, locate the midpoint and notch it up before joining it to the skirt part of the dress. So placing both notches together, we would go ahead and sew on it. So now I'm done sewing, and next thing we're going to do is to turn the lining over. So we'll begin as usual, just like we did in the back. We'll start by sewing on the down parts first of all. This is to make sure that the clothes folds inwards, and then after sewing on the down parts, we'll go ahead and sew on both sides. So I'm done sewing and I turned it all over with the little space I left. So next thing I'm going to do is just to close the space up. So now the next thing I'm going to do is to attach my inner corset to the back of the dress. So while attaching the inner corset to the back of the dress, I would make sure that the inner corset does not align or does not stop at the same line as the zipper allowance. So I made sure that the 1 inch zipper allowance was outward and the inner corset was started 1 inch before the allowance. So in this point here, I wanted to attach the shoulder the shoulder of the front to the back together because I wanted to sew those long designs that you guys saw on the dress in the thumbnail. I wanted to sew those designs before attaching my zip. So here I was just like pinning it down so that I could attach both shoulders together. But then later on I changed my mind and just like went ahead to sew the zip together because I wanted my client to wear the dress before attaching the strips so that I will know if the dress actually fits before attaching the strips. So after attaching the shoulder and everything, I just went ahead to fix the zip up and to like sew the dress up together. So here I've sewn the dress together with the allowance. I also went ahead to open up eyelets on the inner corset, and for the zip allowance, for the zip, for the zip region, I would first of all mark the point where my zip is going to stop, and then from the down of the dress to that point, I will sew it up first, taking note of my 1 inch allowance. And then after joining from the down to the point where my zip stops, I'll go ahead and attach my zip to the dress. So after attaching the zip, my client came for fitting, and when I was satisfied that the dress fitted her properly, I went ahead to attach these designs on the dress. So I made this design by cutting long strips of chiffon. Any inches long is fine, and 3 inches wide was the width. So I gathered the material and just sewed it on the dress. So I've come to the end of this sewing tutorial. If you learned something today, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel to support me and to help me bring more videos to you all. Thank you and bye.